Good evening. I thought I'd come on here and talk about something that's been eating me up on the inside. As you know, I'm running for president in 2020, and I'd like to represent the people who have been forgotten in this country. The little people, the workers, the traditional American families. Mostly I'm referring to the white people that the bankers and their elite have been trying to bury under invasion and under a sea of oppression for the last 50 years. But let me make the main point that I wanted to make this evening. Not long ago, a young man in Washington, D.C., a young man who extended his home unto me as my own, allowed me to sleep at his home. While I was doing activism in D.C., I stopped for a campaign rally in front of the White House, and he also accompanied me for some of my LLC or businesses company in D.C. as well. And the man was not afraid of exposing himself in my presence in the public when there were people that definitely knew who I was that were taking our picture. And this young man recently killed himself on the night of the Pittsburgh incident. I don't know what affiliation, if any, he had with that incident, but I do know that this young man went to an island in Washington, D.C. and ended his life. I believe his brother is currently in prison for two things that are not a crime, which the Jews that run our government decided to make a crime in conjunction with each other, which is, I believe, something to do with a marijuana charge, and which is legal in Washington, as well as something to do with a gun charge, which he legally possessed in Washington. So they have him as a political prisoner in Washington, D.C., and he knows that his brother has taken his own life, and this young man, who extended his home to me, allow me a place to rest my head in between back-to-back days of activism on the East Coast, is now in prison for two things which in and of themselves are not illegal. They even admit in the press that they had to invent something to keep this guy in jail with. His own lawyer said they've been dreaming up ways to keep this guy in jail. And I hope he's out of jail now, but if he isn't now, he should be. And I hope if he's watching this, he knows that I'm referring to him. May God rest the soul of his brother, and may God help this young man who now faces these turbulent times ahead in his quest. May his quest for vengeance be peaceful. May he find a way to rectify the issues that had him and his brother so down when I visited them. I'm hoping that his brother is watching on from the next world and guiding him in some way. Whether he's still facing the walls of a prison cell or whether he's free and contemplating how he's going to help liberate this country. I think there are a lot of different things weighing in on what has happened to this young man, but the biggest loss of all must be, of course, that of his brother. They were peaceful young men. They were very nice. They were accommodating, and they would offer me the shirts off their back if it would have helped me in my campaign and my activism on the East Coast. So a moment of silence for the young man who was lost that night, and also a moment of respect for his brother. He should be out of prison by now. I think he is, but I'll have to check. And this is, of course, the Huffington Post article wrote this article about them and asked me if I stayed at their house. And I chose not to dignify the Jew who wrote to me from the Huffington Post with a response. But I did let her know that our patience has its limits. And we as Americans have many things that we value other than just freedom from jail cells that we don't belong in. So I've got behind me some footage from a beautiful area in northern Idaho. And I was listening to Henry Ford's The International Jew. And I stopped and I took a bath for an hour, hour and a half. And I thought, what is it that Henry Ford said made this country so great? And it was its freedoms. He wasn't so much into demographics back then as we are now, with the exception of the chapter that he wrote on Jews intentionally hiding the numbers they were flooding into the country with, and intentionally keeping themselves off from the immigration and census figures. The Jews always try and hide among whites or other people. They always came in as Italians and Polish and so on. But regardless, the problem this country has is we've had far too many immigrants. I was in the ride share on the way home, and the driver was talking about how he was watching stuff from the 1960s. And I asked him, you thought things were better back then, didn't you? He said, yes. I said, you realize the country had less than half as many people in it as it does now? And he said, yes. And I said, you realize that traditional Americans have had about 2 kids apiece since then? He says, I know that. So I said, what is it that drives up prices and rent and mortgages, other than just speculation in the bankers. By the way, I said all of this without using the word Jew to him. And we agreed population density was the problem. So right now, without the bankers' speculation, without these Rothschild's associates and all these different Jewish bankers that have destroyed the quality of life and the purchasing power of the American dollar, we would be living large like our ancestors did in the 50s and 60s. You could work as a single income family household and afford a beautiful middle income class house, a beautiful equivalent of like a $400,000 or $500,000 house now, where you're only using 10 or 15% or maybe even at best 20% of your income to pay for your mortgage. This is pure usury. With the amount of technology we have now and the amount of technology we have that can be used to leverage the productivity of the American worker, we should be living as kings. The common man should be living as a king in this country. Instead of living in angst that there'll be no future for themselves and their children, these young men that I met in Washington, D.C. should have 3 or 4 kids each and a beautiful American house on a nice little plot of land. And they're not going to have that because the Jewish bankers, this international elite, this 1% which is Jewish, will not allow traditional Americans to have their freedom. I've been reading Henry Ford's International Jew, and I can tell you it has been mindful. The destruction of every aspect of independence in American life. Forget race, forget all that. Every aspect of what makes us independent and good as Americans has been intentionally undermined by a foreign, hostile elite that has roots in every country of the world, that directs its evil power against any people which seek independence and freedom, which I hope you as Americans in voting for me in 2020 will do. This is not a question merely of race. True, the Jews have many races they're trying to exterminate, and yes, these international bankers are the elite of the Jews, the backbone of the Jewish people, or the Jews internationally. But there are other issues at stake here. If you read Henry Ford's The International Jew, you'll see that they're seeking to crush us, crush our spirit of liberty, of freedom, of independence, to take away those things which are inputs into facilitating independence. Cheap land, low population density, those things what made this the promised land in part, aside from the character of the men that choose to pioneer this land. Those things which facilitate freedom and liberty and a high standard of life with minimal labor are being taken from us. Never forget what has been taken from you, American. Never forget vast tracts of land, neighbors that had environmentally sustainable birth rates, friendly neighbors you didn't have to run from every 5 years with some sort of flight into a new suburb or a new development out in the middle of nowhere where there are no jobs. The ability to afford a house and be a single income household, the ability to use 10 to 20% of your after-tax income to pay your mortgage, the ability to send your children to public schools that function. They've taken all of these things from you. They're coming for all of those other freedoms that we have as Americans, but there are plenty of wide open areas of land, and if we get rid of these Goldman Sachs and these Rothschilds and these Morgans and these other Jewish bankers from control, the seat of power in our country, if we abolish the Federal Reserve, we again can have one income households where you can afford your mortgage using 10, 15, 25% of your income. And I promise you this, Americans, if you get me into the White House and you help me smash the Jewish control of Congress and the Jew banker control of all of our financial institutions, which I will do through executive power, I will restore the American dream as it was before the Federal Reserve and the implicit Jewish tax of inflation that has been forced on all of us Americans, that has been choking us, draining the lifeblood of our country. The Jewish 1% will have to prove, as in expulsions past, that they earned their money fairly, and the money they inherited has been fairly earned. In France, England, Germany, and other places of expulsion, Jews before leaving had to prove that what they took with them was not taken through swindle and was not taken through fraud. And on their way out the door, these bankers are going to have to prove that. And they won't be able to leave their prison cell unless they bring back what they've sent overseas, if they've sent their stolen money or their stolen wealth overseas. Help me to strip these parasites, these nation-wrecking bankers of the wealth they have stolen, stripped from you and your children, and help me distribute that back to the American people. Help me regain all of this stolen wealth so that we again as Americans can have single income households. I think the man should work, but if the woman wants to work and the man wants to stay at home, so be it. We need to have single income households. We need to have good neighborhoods, and we need to stop spending all of our damn tax money on aid to foreign terrorist nations like Israel. So if I could get the driver of my rideshare tonight to read The International Jew, maybe I could persuade you, the viewer, also to watch this or to read this book or listen to the audiobook. I like the one as narrated by Alex Linder. The International Jew. You must understand what has been taken specifically from Americans and how Henry Ford laid out in his chapters through his interpretation applied specifically to America of the protocols, how everything that should be ours has been taken. You have no idea what you have lost. We have about 1/4 to 1/5 the disposable income that we should have as Americans. And let's speak to Americans with this voice in the next election, because God knows that the educational systems and value systems that people learn through the television now emphasize the importance of money. So on the issue of money, we can win the vote. And by restoring wealth to the individual Americans that seek to have healthy households. Read Henry Ford's The International Jew so you can understand, as I do, exactly what has been taken from you. Good night, and God bless America, and remember to vote for me in 2020, and don't vote for anyone that has any allegiance to Israel, including Donald Trump.